Alrighty, so a lot of things happened in the year 1848. The first ever department store opens. They find gold at Sutter's Mill in California. Oh, Wisconsin became a state. My family came to the United States, and almost all of Europe was in a one giant revolution. Well, not one giant revolution, but a whole ton of little itty bitty revolutions were going on. As we're going to spend this little video looking at the revolutions of 1848, we call it Springtime of the Peoples, when pretty much everybody was doing these guys over here are, and that's behind a bunch of barricades in the streets shooting out with the imperial and monarchical rulers. So let's get started here and talk about nice little quote, great quote that I love, and that is when France sneezes, Europe catches a cold, because we're going to see a trend here, ladies and gentlemen, that most of these revolutions will start in France and then will spread everywhere else. And the thing is, think about what trend movement starts, what allows trends movement to spread. Kind of think about those questions as we go through this little lecture here. So let's move on here real quick. Here, let's talk about a turning point in which history failed to turn. It's kind of a cool quote for this because obviously it could have been a big turning point in European history where all these revolutions go, and it's this turning point that's there. We never actually crossed it because almost all the revolutions of 1848 fail miserably. And so it's kind of a funny part when you talk about these revolutions. So we're looking at George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He's a thinker and a historian. And there is a theory he has, a Hegelian dialect, about how history advances through conflict. So history only goes forward because we have conflicts, and we essentially have one phase makes the opposite phase. So when we go to one thing, we have the opposite. So we have, if we're having absolutism, go to democracy, we get something different. You know what I mean? And we kind of create those two little butt heads and create what we actually have. And so that's where history has to get by that point. So look, we've had this whole period of the absolutism for a long, long time, especially after the conservative movements of 1815, and we try to go to democracy, and it doesn't go all that well. And that's kind of where we're sitting at here in terms of how history moves on. All right, long-term problems. Okay, this is a powder keg ready to go kaboomy, and that's part of our issue here. Okay, is that we have pre-1848 lots of problems that are happening. We have some long-term issues, short-term issues, and some ideological things that are kind of creating a smoldering powder keg, or a powder keg with a little book of matches right next to it, ready to go kaboom. And so one of the first things is the idea of industrialization. That industrialization is that there are economic challenges happening for both rulers, the idea of urbanization, and challenges to that artisan class that's getting pushed out by the factories. So these guys here are losing their jobs. Cities are expanding without the people in the cities not always having jobs and those kind of things, and people not being closer together. And obviously, when people get closer together, you have a greater chance for revolution because, well, they're closer together. The stakes get higher, tensions get higher, all that kind of stuff. And we also have economic challenges to rulers. Maybe the rulers aren't the end-all, be-all, and richest people anymore, and they're losing some power out that way. Population goes up. And I was told Thomas Malthus already how population has doubled. More people means more tensions. We have ideological issues. We have all the ideas of nationalism and liberalism and socialism, democracy. You have the idea of romanticism stirring up all these nationalistic tensions and showing paintings and songs and all that kind of stuff about how we need to do these certain things and getting all people all fired up and all those kind of deals happening, right? We have repressive measures by the conservative group. We have things like the Carlsbad decrees in Prussia, where we said, you can't talk about stuff, we're going to censor you, all those kind of things. We have the Six Acts in England, where basically essentially said that people can't meet in large groups. They cannot protest in large groups. This is where we have the Peterloo Massacre in 1813, wherever it was. And that's where we had that come out of in England. And many states, rocking the Louis, the Napoleon thing, where they have a secret police force who are watching, checking out all these kind of things and making sure that everyone's behaving and being good and nobody is going against the absolutist or monarchical government. Wow. Okay. All those kind of things are happening. Long-term deals kind of create this simmering powder keg. Top it off, our ideological type things go on here. Liberals are getting frustrated because they want to see reform. The only place we actually really see a lot of liberal reform go down is in Britain. And Britain doesn't have a monarchical government. It has, that constitutional monarchy where the parliament really has more power. And so they're not really on the continent, especially. They're not seeing these liberal movements among the liberal people. Most of the countries, wherever you're in Italy, or Austria, or France, or Prussia, or wherever, they're not seeing these changes, right? They want to see this constitution, they want to see representative government, and they aren't seeing it. Nationalists are pissed off right now. Okay, the old way of doing things is sticking there. Remember, those conservative people have this old way of doing stuff, and they're kind of stuck right there. And there's no way. They don't have this fact of self-determination. They're all kind of stopped that way. They can't have their own country, and there's a lot of issues there. Working class also has problems too, because they call the 1840s the Hungry 40s. Remember, we have the Irish potato famine going on. And so the potato famine is not only in Ireland, but it's all over Europe. And so a lot of Europe is hungry because not only is the potato famine going down, but also we have problems with unemployment due to machinery. We have a cereal famine hitting all the grain crops. Things are not good right now in Europe. Okay, a lot of people are angry. So this is like, kind of stirring the pot and creating something ready to go kaboom. All right, we have short-term issues. Oh, here we go. Agricultural crises, right? The poor cereal harvests bring up prices of grain to 60% because obviously supply and demand, right? Lower supply means higher prices. Potato blight in Ireland, over 100% for increase of that potato crop, not only in Ireland, but also across Europe, because obviously potato is still a big part of diet in areas of Germany and that kind of stuff. All right. The financial crises are hitting us. A lot of investment bubbles burst. So remember, the investment bubbles when you invest in technology, railways, iron, coal, whatever it might be, and buy that stock up ahead of time so that you can then sell later on and make a ton of money off of it. Well, some of these bubbles burst because of competition, overproduction, all these issues that take place. Some of these bubbles, burst. And that's a problem because now people are ruined who are in that entrepreneurial class. Unemployment starts really going up rapidly, right? The artisans are being put out of business by the factories. So those who are making, nice handmade goods are now being pushed out by cheap mass-produced crap. And top it off too, okay, the more new machinery is putting more unskilled workers out of business too. This puts that now have the working middle classes are now in the same misery as everybody else. And so now that poorer class is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, while the upper class is getting, smaller, 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 richer and richer and richer. And those are the problems we have going on. All right. Prince Metternich kind of got to start this whole deal, right? Remember, he was the very conservative man who helped start the whole Congress of Europe. And, he makes this famous quote. It's almost a famous quote. He goes to 1815, says, "We have redrawn Europe's map for eternity." He says, "We're going to fix Europe forever and ever and ever and ever and ever." Almost like a peace in our time quote, like David Lloyd George said. And it's going to live down infamy, though there's other ways to remember a lot more. Because, look, while, yes, we redrew the map of Europe, every single little one of these little explosion thingies on here is a revolt that happens in the year 1848. So really, while he says he redrew things, right? It doesn't do much because we have all these revolutions to go down. So the only downside of revolution is that while there are revolutions happening, it's not one revolution. And so a lot of different reasons for a lot of different revolutions happen. And it's all reactions to different stuff, short-term, long-term issues, different ideologies, different reasons where we're asking, look for the different isms that create these revolutions in different places. We have different leaders, different countries, all over the different kind of things happening. And by the way, two countries have no revolution, right? England, Russia, no revolution to speak of because, one, England is too advanced. England's too stable. Russia, too agricultural, and it's not a big problem yet. And so Russia has its own revolution. Don't worry, give it, 60 years. Okay? But whatever. So let's start with France, everyone's favorite. Okay? Here's France seen in a German cartoon as the giant sea snake, as having kind of the problem, as everyone's kind of scared what France is going to do, what's going to happen here in France. So France is a problem, right? Okay, we talked in class on Friday of King Louis Philippe, who was supposed to be the citizen king, born to the bourgeois class, middle class type guy, or look middle class king, right? Guess what? He didn't. He lived in a lavish fashion, as did all the previous monarchs before him, which kind of ticks off a lot of people because outwardly he had this appearance as very simple and very worldly and very just like the people of France. And he was so corrupt, it's not even funny. There were a lot of deals going on behind the people's backs. He promised a lot of reforms, never happened. Things like access to elections and voting and all that kind of stuff. And these things don't go down. Okay, France, by the way, okay, has very high unemployment, losing lots of skilled jobs. France by 1848 is starting to industrialize much as England had before them. And so that artisan class, skilled workers who have a certain trade and skill are out of work. Now, we've seen France before. When they're hungry, when they're out of work, bad things happen in the streets of Paris. Heads get put on pikes and bad things go down. Well, to head this off, one of the things that Louis Philippe does is he outlaws public assembly. And a lot of countries will put these restrictions on where they say, listen, you cannot be meeting in big groups out in the streets because that just reeks of revolution, okay? And we can't have that go down. Well, it's going to tick people off more because now they can't meet. Civil rights are being taken away. Louis Philippe does have an attempt on his life that fails. And in February 1848, we have what's called the February Revolution, where a lot of working class liberals are very unhappy with not only Louis Philippe, but also his main minister here, Francois Guizot, who opposed electoral reforms and giving people the right to vote and tried to elect a constitution, all those kind of deals. And the way they go about this isn't necessarily with mass protests because you can't do it outside, right? No formal assembly. So they have protest banquets or reform banquets where they have these parties and dinners and stuff, and they're used to protest against the king, to discuss protests, all this kind of stuff. Well, the Paris banquet, these big parties, these big dinners, is banned in Paris. You can't meet there. And so people start to move to the streets, start protesting, in which we have we then have troops opening up fire on peaceful protests, going back to Napoleon's idea of giving the people a whiff of grape shot. All right. And so these things start exploding, right? All of a sudden, barricades are erected. We talk about barricades being erected. This is that famous scene from Les Mis. You can see the scene in the corner down here of my slide here, where you have we're going to pile up all kinds of garbage in the alleyways, and we're going to block off the streets and stuff, and the military comes through, we are going to shoot back and they're going to shoot us, okay? And you do have a National Guard in France who's supposed to come in and keep the peace, all that kind of stuff. There's citizen soldiers who are, from that lower class people, and they're like, screw this. They go off to the radicals and they join people there. So when King Louis Philippe loses Paris, much as we saw during the French Revolution, he essentially abdicates, leaves the throne, gets the hell out of Dodge, and France is in trouble once again. By the way, great picture here of Louis Philippe as the pear, kind of showing just how he looks like a pear and stuff. Kind of looks like Fat Elvis over here a little bit, but it's kind of cool drawing a Louis Philippe. Obviously, he's not staying very steady in terms of trying to stay, raise up a Prince Louis, trying to get people to go forward to the Prince Day, that kind of stuff. Here you see Victor Hugo in this whole painting here. Kind of cool little cartoon trying to put people off here. We have some ideas coming up from in France. What to do now, right? You have no king. You have abdication, trying to figure out how to make things work. And Alphonse Lambertine is one of the people who is a poet, liberal, and rights of man kind of person, right? One of the things that liberals really believed in was the idea of rights, of constitutions, and he wrote this document saying the rights of man, or kind of proposed a new provisional government where you had free speech and right to property and secular education, all those kind of things we've seen during the French Revolution, right? And so you have this new provisional government that gets formed, and all these conservatives and liberals are really suspicious of of these radicals who kind of take over, because they're like, we saw this during the Reign of Terror and it wasn't good. And so nobody really trusts this government who kind of takes over, makes this new kind of community public safety-esque kind of government. And they're going to do that kind of stuff, but still. One of the people that involved in this was Louis Blanc, who helped set up the socialist movements in Paris. And so he believed in what they call the right to work. And so you have a right to work legislation where you have the opportunity to that if you are living in Paris, you have the right to have a job. And so people who didn't have a job, they created what are called national workshops. National workshops supposed to be, national factories where unskilled people can get a job. So every single person has a job. If you are unemployed, you get a job. Unfortunately, Louis Blanc and his right to work kind of stuff ended up being, instead of getting a job in a factory or a job in the field you're experienced in, your job ended up being digging ditches or cleaning latrines, those kind of deals. Everyone had a job. Most of these jobs are very, very unskilled. And you start seeing people saying, why should I get a skill? Why should I have a skill where I can go and get a job and get paid for doing work that's easy? You know what I mean? And so it didn't really work too well that way. You have, with this kind of financial crisis where all the money pulls out of Paris. That capital, the investor class is like, well, I'm not going to get workers. I can't kind of stuff. It's not a good situation for me. They pull people out. So all the money pulls out. And while money pulls out, stock market crashes. And to make up all this money, you have to start taxing the peasants, which people start getting very, very unhappy about because you got to pay for all this stuff. Like, the right to work, the national workshops, all those kind of things. So there's not good things, okay? You have this coalition that kind of develops here in Paris, coalition of people and of ideologies, the Republicans and Democrats and the groups trying to run this whole deal, and things start splitting off. So the two groups really split are liberals and socialists because they split over a couple different topics. One big topic is elections and a constituent assembly in terms of when they're going to do elections, how they're going to do elections, who gets to vote, all those issues. Government social programs and the cost. While liberals are laissez-faire, socialists want to see more social programs. The question is who's going to pay for these things. And that question of laissez-faire is the biggest thing because liberals are stuck on laissez-faire policy, want to see laissez-faire government, and let's see people do what they got to do. Whereas, the socialists want to be like, government-controlled economies, and are they violating this laissez-faire policy? And then socialists also made the question about the idea of liberty for all men, freedom, and have private property, because if you have private property, there's still going to be inequality. And it's that inequality is still going down here. And then just all these issues with the bourgeois middle class and the proletariat working class with nature of work and what kind of jobs people have and how they're being treated in the jobs and the right to unionize, how unions were illegal in Paris, and pay levels and how people weren't getting paid what they felt they were worth and all those kind of things. And it was just bad. So the compromise they have in April is a conservative majority in the National Assembly. They actually end up with conservatives and National Assembly because it's the liberals and the socialists can't get together on stuff. And they start debating about what's going to happen to these social programs like national workshops where people have jobs. And they really want to get rid of Blanc and the radicals, and they shut those national workshops. And the poor gets even madder because now their jobs are done. And so those class tensions of us v them, of poor v rich, just gets worse and worse in France. And here comes June, where the worker groups, that lower class in Paris, rise up in insurrection. So you have, once again, poor or lower class mobs up in Paris. And they basically said, that the government had betrayed the original revolution. They are just working for themselves, whereas they promised to be more liberal. And so the workers want to have money. They want to say, you have rich people running everything. What about us? What about us? What about us? We need money going down to the poor. So once again, we have barricades in the streets. And there's problems. So obviously some of the scenes in Les Miserables is actually based on an earlier event. But parts of, some of the scenes we see in Les Miserables, some of the things that are brought in with the barricades in the streets, all kind of stuff, were based upon some of the things that happen here, though the actual event itself in Les Miserables is based on something that's very earlier. And so now we have this new liberal conservative coalition, which is interesting. We have liberals and conservatives getting together, because they're afraid of the lower class socialists and the radicals that are there, barricading themselves in the streets and trying to, take over government that way. And so that's one of the things we have. Here are the barricades. Obviously, those scenes from Les Miserables kind of take, from those scenes of the barricades where you have people barricaded up behind these, waving the tricolor, all that kind of stuff against the armies. By the end of this whole thing, we have what we call a second French Republic to declare. The first French Republic being back to the Revolution. A general named Louis Conviac assumes all the power and kind of steps in, kind of like Napoleon did almost in a way, and crushes revolt and stops all the shooting and all kind of things. Obviously, 10,000 people are dead, which is the revolution in France. No kidding, right? And you have a victory for the conservatives because now this very radical revolution, socialist revolution, was put down. And so by November, we have a new constitution. So we say we're elected president, we have one house legislature, kind of, U.S.-esque in a way ish. And we get a president who is actually the cousin of Napoleon Bonaparte, named or nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who defeats the General Quebec, who is the kind of the hero in his election. And Louis Napoleon was a law and order candidate. We're going to step in, we're going to take care of business. In a way, more of a conservative type person in a way, which is interesting why he gets elected. But the middle class opinion went really, really against the socialists because they were more, really more towards the right, towards the royalists because of the issue of, the revolts in the streets and those kind of things kind of turns them off to it. And so when Louis Napoleon gets in there, he kind of acts ultra conservative. And so he takes all those radical officials like government and gets rid of them. He does this great purge, you will, and takes everybody who was a radical out of the government and kind of gets rid of them and replaces them with people who are conservative, like any president kind of do. You know what I mean? When he gets to that National Assembly, he basically does a British Parliament-esque type thing where he dissolves the whole work, says, let's have a new election, get more people in there. He says, I'm a man of the people, all those kind of things, and kind of gets people on his side, even though when the people were dissenting, he'd send the army out with that grape shot and take care of business. So not a super popular guy, but then as Napoleon Bonaparte did as well, eventually in 1851, just 3 short years later, he declares himself emperor in a second French Empire. And the national vote said, sure, why not? And we're right back to where we started in France. We kind of try the revolution, doesn't happen, go back to this. Do you see a trend so far? Let's go to Austria. Austria has different problems, right? France is all about class warfare. Austria is about national warfare. So here's the Austrian Empire in 1830. The problem is this. You kind of see down here, you have Ottoman Empire down here on the very, very edge. And then throughout this Austrian Empire, you have different little groups all over the place. You have groups of Germans, you have groups of Hungarians or Magyars, where you have Serbs and Croats and Slovaks and Poles and Czechs. And you have this weird multinational empire situation going on, being ruled from over here in Vienna. And so it's kind of a really weird situation. Actually, Vienna's up here. Very weird kind of situation in terms of Austria. So we have our Ferdinand I, who is our, a king, and the empire is this, very, very conservative monarchy. Obviously, Prince Metternich is a big part of this, where you have a very conservative group, very nationalist conservative group with a very racially and culturally and ethnically heterogeneous place where you have all these different groups and languages and beliefs and cultures all over this area. And so the scary part of Austria is, remember, serfdom still exists. We talked about Joseph II trying to get rid of it before, but serfdom really does still exist here because of everything. So serfdom really doesn't exist yet here in Austria. And so it's really light. It's still very agricultural. It's not very it's not very industrial yet, where you have the opportunity to kind of advance to industrial, those kind of deals, all about agriculture, all about serfdom. And, all the reliance of, serfdom says people have no hope. It's corrupt, it's inefficient, it's backwards to what the 19th century is. And they're competing with Prussia, who is advancing, who is industrializing, who is making things better. And so this empire is really vulnerable then to making changes that are very revolutionary, need to make changes happen very, very quickly. Right, don't they? That's right. All right, so we have Austrian students, young people who are educated, who are seeing what's going on, reading what's happening around Europe, and they make militias, and they start getting together to see if they can overthrow the government. And so the liberal revolution in Austria happens with young people, students. This is, right after France, where they had seen this whole deal. And so in March, you see rioting break out in Vienna, the capital of Austria, and the Austrian Empire collapses from this revolution. Metternich gets the hell out of there. You have assemblies that meet. The assembly that meets then decides to outlaw serfdom, the robot, all that kind of stuff. And the problem with the revolution really can't sustain itself. The revolution, this temporary government they put in place, doesn't really know what the heck they're doing yet. they really don't have a solid, it's like kind of a situation where they kind of come in, they swoop in, they have a riot, revolt, take over power, and then they can't really do much about it. And so because they can't do much about it, they start failing. And so here we see Metternich busting tail out of Austria. And so when the new Austrian emperor comes in, it's going to be Franz Joseph I, who's a different emperor. And so he does a lot of things, kind of make people happy, kind of draw middle ground where he agrees to a constitution, make sure the constitutions are there. He abolishes serfdom in the empire, and he actually rules for a very, very long time. He rules up until World War I. At the same time in Austria, you have that's your liberal revolution in Austria. You also have some national revolutions going on as well, because you have these different national groups that are happening here. Yeah, right. National groups, huh? You agree? I thought so. All right. So in Budapest, you have Hungary, and in the ethnic group there is the Magyars. They're a very, very unique ethnic group. They're not Slavic like you see in other parts of Hungary. Their language is actually related to Finnish, which is really messed up when you think about it, because Hungary's having Central Europe, whereas Finland's in Scandinavia. Don't ask me how the whole thing happened. There's a reason for it, but not to talk about here. Long story short, when Paris starts doing their thing, a lot of the Magyars and Hungarians who are like, you know what? This is kind of BS. We are a separate group living underneath Austrian rules, having to speak German because, they had to speak German in all their official things. They had to write in German, learn German, not use their language. Like, this is bullcrap. We are Magyars, we are Hungarian, we speak a language, and you know what? We should do this. And so they have this diet, and nationalists say we should have liberty for all Magyars. We should be able to do what we need to do. Hi, thank you. And so the man that comes up is Louis Kossuth, who becomes the leader of this cause. You see him in the picture there. And so he works for this group, and they can't keep official records because, that would get you in trouble. And he has all these letters and stuff that he keeps, and eventually does get arrested, all those kind of things, put in prison. And he kind of gives this big speech saying we should have a Hungary for Hungarians. It's a whole nationalism movement, Hungary for Hungarians versus Hungary for being part of Austria. And they make themselves their own place. They say we're a free country, we make a constitution. They send it to Franz Joseph to sign off. They get all ready to go here, ready to make their own language with their people, their own coins, and they even start ripping on people who aren't Magyar, Hungarian. They start ripping all the Slavs that live over there, who are like, well, you know what, you shouldn't be here either. Because of everything. And so they start ripping on everybody and everything that's happening here. And so Franz Joseph surprised everybody when he says, guess what? No constitution, and Hungary says, bye-bye, I don't care. And so we start having problems, right? So here's our diet at Poznan. After that whole deal goes down with Louis or Lajos Kossuth, we have the Austrians who invade into the new Hungary. That's not quite Hungary yet. And Hungarian armies actually beat them. They get together, start kicking tail, start beating the Austrians, and start pushing towards Vienna and say, hey, we're going to take this whole thing over. The Slavics didn't like this either because obviously, the Hungarians were ripping on the Slavs left and right. And so the Slavs, who didn't really agree with the Austrians either, actually joined with the Austrians, because it's confusing, right? And they have to fight back, and the Hungarian army withdraws. Then the Russians get involved, because obviously the Russians are kind of Slavic. The Russians had to do with the Austrians. They have the Holy Alliance to make sure that all revolutions are put down. So the Russians get a whole army of about 120,000, drop it on the Hungarians, and the Hungarians get their butts kicked. When they come out of this is that in 1849, the Austrians do proclaim for what's called minority rights and start respecting some minority beliefs, some language issues, that kind of thing they start doing. But it's not like Hungary has its own country. They're going to have that until 1866. They'll get autonomy to a degree. They're going to share a king, and it's a whole other nationalist type deal where they're going to share a ruler in what they're going to call the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Russia time. We have Nicholas I, right? We talked to him last with the Decembrists in class, and he did raise the army of 400,000, dropped 140,000 to put down the revolt, and helped him out there a little bit. Bohemia. Let's move from, we did France, we did Austria. Let's go to the German states now. So Bohemia, southern Germany, was now Czechoslovakia type area. It was actually part of Austria this time as well, and they had their own revolution, right? So Bohemia is a weird place. You have Slavic people like Czechs and Slovaks who are there, and you have Germans. And so they had these conferences, the Pan-Slavic Conference and the Pan-German Conference. All Germans got together and said we should be our own country. All the Slavs got together and said we should be our own country. It's oozing with nationalism, ladies and gentlemen, all that kind of stuff. And they meet in the city of Prague or Praha. And you know this idea of Austro-Slavism, where this Pan-Slav Congress met together, all different Slavic groups, Ukrainians and South Slavs and Czech Slavs, all 340 of them, to figure out how the Slavics are going to work with Austria. And essentially, what they develop is a constitution to have an autonomous group within the Hungarian Habsburg Empire. Essentially, their own little like group in there that has their own rules, own constitutions within the empire. That didn't go over so hot. In the end, you see barricades in the streets in Prague, and the Austrian military attacks Prague, occupies it, crushes, starts shelling the people. Remember Napoleon's quote, "A little whiff of grape shot does go a long way." You see a trend here, ladies and gentlemen, for what happens here. And so Bohemia goes down as well in terms of all those kind of things. Do we see a trend here, ladies and gentlemen? Now, I guess, it's been a long time. We're doing this talking for a little longer. I want to talk about this. We're probably falling asleep. And feel free to take a break here as we head from, Prussia and Austria now to Italy. Italy has its own problems here. There's upheaval in Italy. Italy has a place where it's looking at three different areas. So you have the Papal States in the middle. You have Austria controlling the northern parts here. You have what's called the Kingdom of Piedmont and Sardinia, out of Sardinia, and you have Piedmont, of course, because it's French, remember, and the Kingdom of two Sicilies, which is Naples, southern Italy, essentially, and Sicily ruled by a king as well. And so you have a lot of Italian nationalists developed this time. We haven't talked about Italy in a while, right? Who basically say that, Italy should not be ruled by foreign masters, especially the Austrians. They hate the Austrians. And up here in the northern part, areas like Milan and Lombardy and Venice want to get rid of all those Austrian guys. And the Kingdom of Sicily is still ruled by Bourbons, who had taken that over earlier under the rule of Louis XIV. And, Sardinia and Piedmont kind of get things going by drafting a constitutional monarchy type deal where they have a very liberal constitution. And so to start the deal off, Sardinia and Piedmont declares war on Austria. And so revolutions start in areas up here and are suppressed by the Austrian army by May. We do see a couple people here, names you got to know. One guy, big guy, name is Giuseppe Mazzini. We'll read some stuff to him later on, who in 1849 does declare a Roman Republic. And even attacks the Papal States, where he kind of goes in and attacks Papal States. And he runs with a nationalist group called the Red Shirts, run by Giuseppe Garibaldi. And Garibaldi is kind of this strength of this movement where he has his own like shock troops, kind of like a Hitler, SA type situation, where he has his red shirts who come in and start kicking butt and all that kind of stuff. And they kick the Pope out because they want to try and make this Roman Republic that's not necessarily Catholic. And so what ends up happening is the Pope is fleeing. There's the Pope, right? He had to get out of here. The revolution starts out really well, but it doesn't really take place. What ends up happening is that Sardinia Piedmont, gets beaten by the Austrians. The French walk in underneath Louis Napoleon, take over the Papal States. And Louis Napoleon has his own reasons for it. He wants to look good with the Pope, right? He wants to make sure that he stays in cool with the Pope so that he can help him out ruling in France. And eventually, Sardinia Piedmont goes back to being a direct monarchy underneath Victor Emmanuel II. That name will be very, very important, as we're going to see a Kingdom of Italy develop later on, and we'll read around there. Things go bad in Italy. Things go south in Italy for a lot of reasons. That Italy is very I didn't go in a lot of detail, and I apologize for this, but all the revolution that happened in Italy was very, very urban. It was all in the cities, and the rural people didn't really care. Most of southern Italy at this time was very, very rural, and people were like, nah, whatever, don't need it, do okay. And the revolutions were not really united. You had different groups fighting against Austrians, against the Pope, and all that kind of stuff. And so, the moderns didn't really, join in, and it's really hard because you have lack of leadership and those kind of deals. But we're going to see Italy do a lot more stuff in the 1850s because of the leadership they gained during this time. German states, finishing up strong with the German states. Germania, okay, 1848. Notice you have the sign of the eagle here, the Prussian eagle, all that kind of stuff as our personification, romantic view of Germania. And our king is Frederick William IV. Remember, more Freddie Williams. Who rules until 1861, and he is also called a Mad Hatter. He may have been kind of crazy. He may have had some issues going on here, maybe a little crazy, and he was very, very anti-liberal, and had this weird kind of Arthurian medieval romantic thing. He loved old stories, kind of wanted to bring back, the old school way of doing things, and kind of this old, almost like 12th century-esque rule he wanted to have. He really wanted to see a very agricultural, very agricultural Prussia take place and kind of focus on those ideas, the old school doing things, and like all the uh, uh, kings before him relied on the nobles, the Junkers of Prussia for his support because they wanted to control the land. So as agriculture became a big deal, again, he needs that support. Prussia, like most everything, was very, very efficient. It ran very, very smoothly, had an economy, strong military, good country. Again, this guy, though, was a conservative monarch, and the liberals wanted Frederick William to share power with other people than just the nobles. And so liberals start revolting in Berlin against monarchy, and they basically say they want to have an assembly. We want to have an assembly, we want to have a vote, we want to have a parliament. Well, Freddie William agrees. Now the nationalists get involved. The nationalists say we want to have a united Germany. We don't want to be all these little German states. We want to have a united Germany. And so we do see army attacking people as they return from a nationalist party in the beer hall. 20,000 soldiers put down revolutions. We see a German tricolor develop over time here, like you see in France or other places too, as the movements are happening. And so there are a lot of little minor revolutions, all that kind of stuff. Austria and Prussia are going to kind of step in, but they don't because you don't have the ability right now. Austria's got their own problem with Metternich leaving. He's getting the hell out of there, right? We have riots in Berlin. There we go. Okay, all those issues happening here. They're going down. And, you think about, when the Prussian armies suppress revolutionaries, the Prussians get a big victory. The liberals get a big victory. Other princes start falling apart. Prussia has trouble at this time, and kind of all these little princedoms and stuff collapse because Prussia can't go through and defend them. And a lot of times, the Prussian liberals get a big victory because they get some more say in what's going on here. And so you see kind of the freedom fighters of Berlin, the funeral for them that died in the streets. We have a assembly that develops in Frankfurt for a German National Assembly. So representatives from all the German states, that kind of stuff in Frankfurt. And they have different things. They have universal suffrage, not just universal suffrage for males. A lot of middle-class delegates are there. They debate over the nature of state. So the big question is, who should be in charge? Do you have the Habsburgs of Austria be in charge of this German assembly, or do you have the Hohenzollerns of Prussia be the ones who are in charge? And so they tend to choose the Archduke of Austria versus the King of Prussia. Cause some issues, right? The Austrian guy is a liberal sympathizer. He's not very conservative. And the problem is they have these two armies, right? Prussia is this great big army, very, very efficient, very, very well done. Austria is not that great. And so the question, who controls the army? So here's the assembly, the German tricolor, all that kind of stuff happening here. Here's your citizen militia that's going on in Berlin, all those problems. And the assembly had some issues. Okay, first of all, they nicknamed it the Professor Parliament because it was a middle-class bourgeois type parliament. You have professors, teachers with the lower class. And so what they did is they made it almost kind of like the States General in France, where you got votes by a thing here, okay? And so the voting system said you got to do this by taxes. So the first class was the top 5% of taxes. Second class was the top 13%, was the next 13%. The third class was 83%. And you got to elect 1/3 of the reps in each class. So the third class was electing 1/3 of the reps. The first class was electing 1/3 of the reps, even though the third class was only 83%. Voting, by the way, was kind of weird, indirect. It was oral and very public votes. Nothing was secret. And so, there's a constitution typed in 1850, but they promised to have 1850, right? And the monarchist wants to keep this tiered voting system so he can keep that top class there on his signs. And so liberals are really mad because they didn't want to, they aren't happy about not having, a more liberal voting system. And so there's always revolution to take place here. They want to unite Germany. And you had that small Germany, large Germany question. Should you be Protestant Prussia? Should you be Catholic Austria? How should things be working in this German state? And we got three Germanys. Like I said, you kind of doubled up on stuff here a little bit. We have three Germanys that are happening. You kind of have this, the question of the Prussians, you have the little German states, you have the Austrian Empire. And here you see the kind of confederation around here, and you kind of figure out who's going to be in charge of this whole deal. What happens, the Prussians really do weird kind of things. I mean, Poland starts kind of rising up again, and the Prussian army walks in there, starts crushing things. The Prussian parliament is fighting, and the nobles are fighting with Frankfurt, and the Prussian army chooses to, at Frankfurt's request, go and invade into Denmark, which is Schleswig-Holstein. When they do this, the international liberals are all freaking out because you don't just go walk in and start attacking and take over some areas. And so both Britain and Russia said, we're going to step in, we're going to have war because we don't want to see this whole thing going on here. And essentially the Prussian army says, forget Frankfurt, forget the government, we're not going to do this kind of stuff anymore. And so it kind of a big problem when they start invading in here, and this whole thing starts kind of falling apart. And so, they started to bail out rights, got rid of a Declaration of Rights, and kind of the question of do you have rights, not have rights, got rejected. And eventually, things kind of start coming back into place where Austria gets Vienna, Frederick William gets rid of Parliament Berlin. They finally say, hey, Frederick William, do you want to have the emperorship? And he declined. He started having a revolt again, and stuff starts falling apart. By 1840, that assembly collapsed. We're right back to where we started. And a German Confederation doesn't really happen. Eventually you have this Confederation brought back, but it's really kind of weird. Like Austria kind of still has power yet. It's really confusing, I know. There's, no united Germany that really exists. And we, have this kind of this big mess in Germany. It's kind of this little mess that's going on with where we're at. Liberalism doesn't really exist anymore in Germany because of these problems, right? I mean, the liberals and the socialists working together didn't really work. And in Germany, it ends up this point right here that rule of force is what matters. I mean, whoever had the army, whoever had the military seems to be the one who is winning. And that's the only way they really happen here. This is where the old school kind of stuff, go through where, militarism, statism really works here, and eventually capitalists come in too eventually, but there's problems happen. Okay. We're going to finish off outside the continent real quick here. That's our last little thing. We talk about charters, obviously, was one of the problems they have, to kind of get that universal suffrage. Movement eventually does die, falls apart, done, okay? We see Seneca Falls in New York with women's rights and kind of women's convention, constitution, those kind of deals. That's another way of things happening. Real quick, the aftermath. The Democrats, more liberal people are out of Europe. They start sweeping people out. It goes back to being very conservative again very quickly in terms of this revolution. We see communism come up because people are so angry about things. And in the aftermath of the revolutions, we see Marx and Engels start writing about how the people need to actually take effect. And so what happens, obviously a big part of the manifesto we're talking about in class next week is going to be the idea of revolution, how the only way you can actually take and make a revolution happen is through a violent revolution and holding those places there. Lastly, why did these revolutions fail? Number one, the working classes didn't be involved in this. It was mostly a middle class, liberal type movement. The only place we saw working class get involved was Paris. And even in Paris, they didn't really do much. And so the working classes didn't really do anything. They were trying to survive and live. And it was more the middle class. And the middle class never actually understood these guys. When they turned radical, middle class kind of held back, and so they didn't want to go as far as being radical and socialist. They kind of couldn't go far enough to actually kind of keep the revolution going. And nationalists is kind of weird because it's really kind of divided in terms of what nationalists are. You see this in Germany with are we Austrian or are we German or are we Prussian? Who's going to be in charge? It's that question of we can't get along and can't be united enough. And so when nationalism is divided, there's no way to actually make that whole thing work. And obviously, where they were successful, areas like France to a degree, and areas like Germany to a degree, they were never actually, they kind of went against those revolutionaries. They didn't kick anybody out, so you didn't see any monarchs or anything getting, executed and heads being put on pikes and mass execution, that kind of deal happening. They were still there, and so those rulers ended up coming back. You see some big things, right? In Austria, for example, serfdom goes bye-bye. All that kind of stuff happens. You see more rights and parliaments, that kind of stuff go down. But really, the long-term, gains will get by later on. So we're going to see things like unification of Germany. We're going to see the collapse of the Habsburg Empire happen in World War I. Conservative forces had triumph. We see a conservative movement, but things start changing and things are going to work their way up as we go here up to eras like World War I, where we're going to see, these deals, because obviously, the social problems are going to be constant challenges happening here. We're going to see conservatives have to try and make concessions with the nobles and the people and stuff to stay in power. They're going to have to make deals to kind of keep things going. And lastly, liberal achievements that they did get, some voting, some rights, that kind of stuff, are going to stay there forever. And we'll see a big change happen within the next 2 years in Europe. So that's it. I'm sorry, I don't take very long. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Watch it in chunks. Take your time with it. You have a couple days to take care of it. Thank you very much.